I used to think the worst kind of pain was being forgotten. But I was wrong. It's being remembered only when someone needs something from you. For years I stayed quiet, hoping silence would earn me love. It didn't. It only made me invisible. But not anymore. 'Cause this time, I'm telling the story myself. Here's what really happened. My name is Erin Wells. I'm 34 years old and I've known something since I was barely tall enough to reach the kitchen counter. Love in my family came with strings attached. And I never quite held the right end. When my little sister Samantha was born, I was almost 6. The moment she arrived, the entire house shifted like gravity had been reset. My mom, Denise, who once read me bedtime stories and baked peanut butter cookies on rainy days, transformed overnight. She hand-stitched Samantha's name onto quilted blankets and ordered handmade bows from Pinterest shops. I became the big helper. Not a daughter, but a prop. My dad, Greg, used to take me on walks to Lake Merritt in Oakland every Saturday, pointing out turtles and buying me cinnamon pretzels. But after Samantha arrived, he spent those mornings filming her every blink, burp, and blink again. I faded into the background. By the time I hit first grade, I had learned that staying quiet was easier than hoping to be noticed. I once drew a picture of a fox dancing under the moon, my proudest creation. I brought it to my mom while she was bottle feeding Samantha. She didn't even look at me, just muttered, "A fox dancing? Why not draw something sweet like your sister? She sketches rainbows so well." I didn't say a word. I folded the drawing and tucked it into my backpack. It never made it to the fridge, unlike Samantha's scribbles, which coated every metallic inch. Samantha had golden curls and a laugh like wind chimes. Whenever she smiled, it was like the sun rose in our living room. Me? I wore oversized glasses by 3rd grade and hunched over library books, mostly to disappear. My mom would joke, "Erin's our little bookworm, smart but a bit of a grump." Her friends laughed. So did I. But inside, stung every time. When I was 11, I won a regional writing contest. First place out of over 700 entries. I stared at the empty seats in the auditorium where my parents should have been. They were busy that night. Samantha had her first piano recital. When I brought home the certificate, my mom said, "That's nice, but don't let school turn you into a robot." My dad asked if there was prize money. But when Samantha landed a small solo in the school's winter concert, they ordered a white tulle dress from Italy and paid a photographer to follow her around like she was royalty. I was backstage helping her zip up the back of that dress. Dozens of pictures were taken. I wasn't in any of them. I believed deep down that if I could be perfect, they might finally see me. So I buried myself in school. I taped every straight-A report card behind my bedroom door. No one ever asked. No one ever looked. But when Samantha brought home a B+, we had chocolate cake and sparkling cider at dinner. They toasted to her bright future. I ate microwaved noodles in silence. It wasn't jealousy. It was heartbreak. By my teens, I was no longer a daughter. I was the unpaid maid. By the time I was a teenager, my role in the house was no longer hidden. It was expected. After school, while my classmates hung out at the skate park or practiced for the school play, I went straight into chores. Dishes, laundry, vacuuming, dusting. Meanwhile, Samantha was always too busy. She had voice lessons or needed rest before her next big piano exam. Anytime I voiced frustration, Mom would give me that look, the one that made my chest tighten, and say, "You're the older one, Erin. You should know better. You should give more." But how much more was left to give? I honestly can't recall the last time they hugged me. But I do remember the night I dozed off at my desk, stomach growling after skipping dinner because Samantha had eaten the last of the noodles and my mom said I'd already had enough. I woke up the next morning to a hard shake and Mom snapping, "Stop being dramatic. The floor still needs sweeping." That was the day something inside me clicked off. I stopped hoping, stopped trying, stopped believing that anything I did would matter to them. I counted down the days to escape. And when my 18th birthday came, I left. No cake, no photos, just an old secondhand suitcase, a bus ticket to Madison, Wisconsin, and a full scholarship to the University of Wisconsin. No one waved goodbye. Samantha was live streaming her new bathroom makeover. Mom sent me one text. "Don't embarrass us. Keep your head down." In Madison, I saw snow piling on windowsills for the first time and felt actual warmth. Not from family, but from the radiator in my tiny dorm room. I majored in biochemistry, a field my mother once mocked as lonely and weird. But to me it was fascinating. I loved learning how molecules moved, how chains formed, how reactions could build life. And for the first time ever, someone looked at me across a lab table and said, "You're brilliant." Not sarcastically, not with a smirk. They meant it. I worked harder than anyone, library shifts, weekend lab cleaning, tutoring just to cover what the scholarship didn't. My roommates joked I didn't know how to sit still. But for me it was never about hustle culture. It was survival. Senior year changed everything. I landed an internship at Virexa Therapeutics, a pharmaceutical firm in Minneapolis. 3 months in, they offered me a job before graduation. Full-time. $75,000 a year. Not life-changing but enough to build one. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment, cooked simple meals, reused glass jars, and hunted Craigslist for second-hand furniture. I saved nearly every bonus, every tax return. My goal was clear: buy a home before 30. And I did. A month after my 29th birthday, I signed for a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in St. Paul. It cost $412,000. I paid nearly half up front from 8 years of quiet grinding. It had creaky hardwood floors, a tiny back patio, and a view of maple trees. Not a mansion, but it was mine. Every inch earned, every wall painted by hand, every room filled with something no one could take from me again. Peace. The kitchen in my new St. Paul townhouse had cool gray tile floors, brushed nickel fixtures, and a built-in convection oven that gleamed under warm pendant lighting. I had dreamed of that oven back in college while crouched over a half-broken hot plate in a shared dorm suite. This house was more than square footage, it was a manifestation of survival. Every corner was mine. I had painted the walls pale cream by hand. I screwed in every cabinet knob myself. I took photos of each room before I brought in a single piece of furniture, just to remember what blank peace looked like. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. But on move-in day, I scribbled a brief card and mailed it to my mother's address in Oakland. One line: "I'm doing well. No need to worry." I didn't expect a response. I wasn't looking for praise. It was just a form of closure, I guess. Or maybe a habit I hadn't broken yet. But I was wrong to think that would be the end of it. 3 months later, a message popped up on my phone while I was prepping dinner after work. "Erin, can you call me? It's about Samantha. It's serious." It was from my mother. I read it twice, feeling nothing at first. Then a strange hollowness settled into my chest. Samantha hadn't reached out in over a decade. Not once since I left for college. Last I heard, my mom had been telling relatives I moved to some snowy cabin near the Canadian border. Like I was a ghost who didn't deserve a name. I didn't reply. But something about the sudden contact made me feel like a trap was being set. And I was right. The invitation arrived a week later. Samantha's engagement party. Ivory cardstock. Gold trim. A separate note included. "We'd like to talk beforehand. Please don't cause a scene. Just be a good sister." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. My mother's. I didn't know what they were planning, but something in me said this wasn't about family or celebration. This was about power. And they still thought they had some over me. The engagement party was held at a massive rented estate on the outskirts of Wayzata, west of Minneapolis. Marble floors. Tall windows. Guests sipping champagne under glowing chandeliers. It looked like a wedding magazine exploded. I walked in wearing a simple black dress and flats, holding a modest silver photo frame that read, "Wishing you joy, quietly and sincerely." Samantha stood in the center of the grand foyer like she was starring in a film. Her blonde hair swept into perfect waves, makeup glowing under soft light. She held her fiancé's hand, a man named Ethan, tall and neatly dressed with a calm presence that didn't match the chaos I knew was coming. I placed my gift on the designated table and almost instantly my mother appeared. Her lips curled into a plastic smile, eyes scanning me like I was an item at a thrift store. "Your father would like a word," she said, tilting her head toward a private sitting room off the main hallway. "Just a quick family moment." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave. But I nodded anyway. I still had that buried reflex to follow their lead even now. Inside the side room, the atmosphere was different. Quiet. Cold. My father stood by a window framed with white drapes, staring out over the lit-up lawn. He didn't turn around when I entered. You've landed on your feet, he said, voice low. Own a home now, don't you? I'm doing all right, I replied cautiously. He turned then, slowly, arms crossed. His eyes studied me, unreadable. Samantha and Ethan want to start a family soon, he said. They need stability. A foundation. I didn't speak. The pit in my stomach started forming. You live alone. That place it's more space than you need. Then came the twist I knew was coming. You should consider giving the house to Samantha. As a gift. A wedding gesture. You've always been the responsible one. My heart thudded once, loud and sharp. That house is mine, I said flatly. No one gave it to me. I work for it. You have no children. No husband. You'll be fine, my mother added, appearing behind me like she'd been listening the whole time. I stared at them, a heat rising in my chest. Not rage, not fear, just clarity. This wasn't about love. It never had been. And something told me they were just getting started. I'm doing fine, I said evenly, folding my arms. My father gave a slight nod, then turned to face me fully, expression unreadable. Samantha's getting married, he began. She deserves a stable foundation. I stayed quiet, though the tightness in my chest grew sharper. You live alone, he continued, almost casually. That house is more than you need. Empty rooms. No kids. No partner. I knew where this was going. But I still asked, what are you saying? As if on cue, my mother stepped into the room like she'd been listening through the door. If you truly care about your sister, Erin, this is your chance to show it, she said, resting her hand on my father's shoulder. They stood side by side, like they were announcing some noble family plan. You should transfer the deed, my father said plainly. Give the house to Samantha and Ethan. As a wedding gift. From one sister to another. I blinked slowly, letting their words sink in. Then I laughed, quiet, dry, hollow. A gift? Of a house worth nearly $500,000. It's already yours, my mother said, as if that somehow made the request less insane. You're not struggling. And because I'm alone, I don't deserve to keep what I've earned? I asked, my voice low and flat. She's just starting her life, my father said. You've already had your turn. My chest burned. I gave her everything, I said. My room. My peace. My childhood. And now you want my home. Don't be selfish, my mother snapped. Family is about sacrifice. I stared her down. I've sacrificed more than you'll ever understand. And I'm done pretending that earns me love. The air between us turned heavy, thick with disappointment, the kind they used to coat every word when I didn't play the role they scripted for me. I'm not giving her the house, I said, final and firm. And if you ever loved me even a little, you'd understand why. My mother's jaw twitched, but I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and left. Back in the main hall, Samantha stood laughing with her friends, twirling her ring like it was the only thing that mattered. But when she saw me, her smile faltered, just for a second. Like she'd heard the word no for the first time. I didn't stay long. Skip the cake, skip the dancing. On the way to my car, my phone buzzed. From Samantha, are you seriously trying to ruin my day? Grow up. I didn't reply. But I knew this wasn't over. A month later, the wedding came. I hadn't planned to attend, but in the end I did. Out of courtesy. Out of curiosity. Maybe even out of spite. The venue was a massive glass conservatory tucked into the Minneapolis suburbs, lit like a fairy tale. But fairy tales aren't real. Not for people like me. The conservatory was stunning arched glass ceilings, twinkling string lights, soft cream-colored seating, and tablecloths stitched with delicate floral patterns. It looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. But behind all that elegance, one thing was painfully clear. I didn't belong there. The moment I stepped inside, my mother's eyes locked on me, expression blank but edged with ice. She didn't smile. Didn't nod. She just turned her back, pretending to be absorbed in arranging the gift table. Samantha didn't acknowledge me either. She was too busy posing beside Ethan, her fiancé, under a towering archway of white lilies and eucalyptus. Flashbulbs flickered around them like a press conference. I found a seat at the far end of the venue near the entrance next to a couple I didn't recognize. They didn't say a word, just offered stiff smiles and returned to their phones. I stayed quiet, sipping lemon water, trying to feel anything. After the vows were exchanged and people started circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could make it through unnoticed. I was wrong. My mother appeared again, her step silent on the polished floor. Your father wants a word, she said, gesturing to a curtained-off corner near the cake display. Please don't make a scene. I almost said no. Almost. But something deep inside still moved when she used that tone, cold, clipped, but coated in family obligation. So I followed. Behind the white curtain it was quiet. Dim, a tall, tiered wedding cake stood to one side, and next to it, a silver cake stand engraved with the couple's names glinted under soft uplighting. My father was waiting there, hands folded in front of him. "You can still fix this," he said, not unkindly. "Don't ruin what could have been a perfect day." I straightened my spine. "If you're here to pressure me again, don't bother. I already gave you my answer." A familiar voice cut in from behind me, my mother, sharp as a knife. "You're acting like we're stealing from you. All we asked for was one gesture." "That house is mine," I said calmly. "No one helped me earn it. Not with money, not with support, not with love." My father's expression shifted. "That's enough," he growled. I turned to walk away. Then he grabbed my wrist. "You think you can humiliate us?" he hissed. I yanked free. "You already did that yourselves." That's when his hand reached for the metal base. A blur of motion. A sickening thud. Pain split through my skull like lightning. I dropped instantly. Blood hit the floor. Screams followed. Guests rushed toward me. A man's voice, Daniel, I remembered, yelled, "She's been assaulted." My mother didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself, Erin." And I realized, even bleeding on the floor, I was still just a burden to them. "What did you just do?" Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. My father froze, eyes wide as if reality had just punched through whatever storm had overtaken him. He took a shaky step backward, staring down at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Then sirens. Red and blue lights flickered through the glass walls of the conservatory. Moments later, 2 officers entered, scanning the room. Their eyes landed directly on my parents. One officer stepped forward, calm but unyielding. "Greg Wells, you are under arrest for suspected aggravated assault." My mother, stunned at first, suddenly found her voice and screamed, "She's faking it. She's lying, trying to ruin her sister's future. This is all a setup." The second officer didn't flinch. He simply said, "Denise Wells, you need to remain silent. You can give your statement at the station." They were handcuffed right there in front of the stunned crowd. Guests who had been clinking glasses with them just hours before now backed away like the floor itself had turned to glass. No one stepped forward to defend them. Not one. While a paramedic gently pressed gauze against the side of my bleeding head, the world around me spun with disbelief. I was placed onto a stretcher and rolled toward the ambulance. As I was lifted inside, I saw Ethan follow, his expression blank but his presence grounding. He sat next to me without asking. "I don't even know what to say," he whispered after a long pause. "Erin, this shouldn't have happened. Not today. Not ever." I looked at him, dizzy but composed enough to speak. "You should think carefully about what you're marrying into." He didn't argue. He just nodded, quietly devastated. The ambulance pulled away from the glowing venue as the reception behind us unraveled. Through the frosted back window I could see guests beginning to scatter. The dream wedding had collapsed like a paper castle in the rain. At the University of Minnesota Medical Center, a nurse bandaged my head while a doctor examined me under cool fluorescent light. Diagnosis: mild concussion, no skull fracture, but the cut needed stitches, 8 of them to be exact. A police officer arrived to document the incident. He asked for my statement, then read back a list of witnesses who had already stepped forward: Ethan, Daniel, the guest who'd called 911, and 3 others. They'd seen everything. And they were willing to speak. Back at the venue, everything was falling apart. Ethan's parents, Margaret and Dean, who had been the picture of quiet sophistication, now stood pale and visibly shaken. Margaret whispered, "That man struck his own daughter at her sister's wedding?" Dean turned to his son, voice tight with disbelief. "Ethan, are you sure this is the family you want to build a life with?" Ethan didn't answer. Because he didn't have to. Samantha rushed to his side, wedding dress immaculate, but her face crumpling. And I knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. I didn't know he would do that. Samantha's voice cracked, rising in desperation as she looked at Ethan's parents. I didn't have anything to do with it. But Margaret Whitmore didn't blink. Her voice was cool, controlled. "You knew what your father was capable of. And you stood by while your sister was assaulted." Samantha stepped back, mascara starting to smudge beneath her eyes. I just didn't want to ruin today." Dean, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. His voice was low but carried like a thunderclap. "The day was already ruined the moment your sister was left bleeding on the floor. If this is how your family handles conflict through silence and violence, then I don't want my son tied to any part of it." His words sliced through the air, heavier than the music that had long since stopped. There were murmurs among the guests. Some started quietly leaving, clutching gift bags and avoiding Samantha's eyes. A few filmed on their phones, others just stared with pity or worse, with judgment. "No, please," Samantha cried, stumbling forward. "Ethan, please don't do this. I love you. Don't let one mistake ruin us." But Ethan didn't turn back. He walked straight to his parents, jaw set, and said simply, "Let's go." Samantha stood frozen, still clutching her bouquet like it could anchor her to reality. Even Becca, her childhood best friend, gathered her things and exited silently. No hug. No words. Just the soft shuffle of shoes on marble and the distant click of doors closing. The dress Samantha had worn with such pride now looked like a burden heavy, suffocating. She sank into a nearby chair, hands trembling. Her eyes never left the door Ethan had walked through. Whispers rippled across the room. "Did you see how she just stood there? Her sister was on the floor. What kind of family allows that?" The staff made a quiet announcement. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, today's celebration is ending early. Thank you for your understanding. No dancing. No cake. No tossing of the bouquet. Just the sound of folding chairs and hearts closing." 3 days later, I was still recovering at home, tucked under a gray blanket on the couch. My head still ached where the stitches had been placed, and every time I changed the bandages, I saw not just the wound, but the truth etched into my skin: they never protected me. Not once. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by. He carried a small bouquet of purple dahlias, my favorite. I didn't know how he knew. "I'm so sorry, Erin," he said, gently setting the flowers on the side table. "That wasn't just one moment of madness. That was your family's truth spilling out in the open." I didn't reply. I couldn't. But I listened. "I've called off the wedding," he added. "I can't marry into that kind of pain. I won't build my life on silence and cruelty." His voice was steady, but his eyes were sad. I nodded slowly. But deep inside, I already knew my family wasn't done yet. On the 4th morning after the attack, I woke to the soft sound of sunlight warming the blinds in my living room. I was back home, propped up on the couch, head bandaged, still aching but no longer in a hospital gown. Ethan sat nearby, holding a dark blue folder on his lap. When he saw my eyes open, he quickly shut it and cleared his throat. "I've been making a few calls," he said gently. "There's someone I think you should talk to. His name is Marcus Ellison. He's a family litigation attorney based here in Hennepin County. He handles complex abuse and property cases. He's really good." I didn't respond right away. Just stared at the ceiling fan slowly turning above me. Then finally I whispered, "They're still my parents." Ethan nodded, but his voice remained steady. "They are. And they also put you in the emergency room. In front of everyone. They tried to take the home you built with your own hands. That isn't just neglect anymore, Erin. That's violence." I turned my head slowly to face him. "If I take this step, there's no undoing it." He reached for my hand. "Some bridges need to burn. You deserve to stop walking through the smoke." That afternoon, Marcus came by the house. He was in his early 40s, well-spoken, dressed in dark slacks and a checkered shirt, no pretense, just focus. After I walked him through everything, the years of dismissal, the manipulation, the blow to my head at Samantha's wedding, he leaned forward and said clearly, "With the testimony and documentation available, we'll be filing under 3 charges. Aggravated assault, emotional abuse over a sustained period, and attempted coercion of real property. The video alone is damning. But your history gives the full picture." I nodded, my pulse racing. I didn't say much, but I reached for the pen he laid on the coffee table. The authorization form had already been filled out, just one blank at the bottom. My hand trembled slightly, but I signed. And with that, everything began. Marcus worked fast, collecting statements from guests, backing up video footage from 6 different angles, pulling hospital records, and notifying the opposing party's attorney, should they choose to respond. 4 days later, the case was ready. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading the court papers. My name was at the top. Erin Wells versus Greg and Denise Wells. Charges: assault, emotional abuse, attempted property coercion. I folded the document and set it down. Ethan reached across the table and touched my back. "I'll be there," he whispered. "Right in the front row." I didn't need to reply. I just nodded. And with that nod, a new chapter began. A few days later, Marcus called again. "They've responded," he said. "They're denying everything." Of course they were. But this time I had the truth on my side. Just as Marcus predicted, their legal team responded with full denial. Their attorney filed a motion to dismiss, claiming there was no clear motive for violence and accusing me of filing the suit out of bitterness and personal vendetta. Marcus didn't flinch. He glanced over the documents, then gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Let them try," he said. "They just gave us the perfect opportunity to show the court exactly what clear really means. We had the evidence, every second of it. 6 different videos from guests' cell phones. The audio was clear. You could hear the metal bass striking my head. See the blood on the floor. Hear my mother shouting, 'Ungrateful,' while I lay motionless. We had hospital records, diagnosis reports, 8 stitches and a concussion. But beyond that, we had something deeper, the full story. 3 decades of being the invisible child. I knew they'd try to paint me as vengeful. That I was tearing apart my own family for money or attention. But this time I wasn't walking into the fire alone. I had Marcus. I had Ethan. And more importantly, I had the courage to speak. On the first morning of the trial, I arrived at the Hennepin County Courthouse in a fitted gray suit. My hair was pulled back, my step steady. My hands held the court summons like a declaration. The courtroom was full. Reporters were present, some from local stations who had run stories after the wedding incident. I felt their eyes, their curiosity, but I kept my focus forward. Ethan sat beside me, his hand resting on mine. His presence didn't waver. Across the aisle, my parents sat like statues. Greg and Denise Wells, once the voices that ruled my life, now wearing matching looks of disdain masked as confidence. But I saw it. The stiffness in their shoulders. The small twitches around their mouths. They weren't in control anymore. The jury, 9 people, most of them around my parents' age, watched quietly as Marcus stood. Calm, confident, cutting. "This is not a sudden family misunderstanding," he said. This was the boiling point of a long-term pattern. A daughter ignored, belittled, and ultimately assaulted when she dared to say no. He presented the evidence one by one. The medical reports, the video footage, the witness list. Ethan, Daniel, a retired couple who had known my family for years and testified to how I was always the one left out. When it was my turn, I took the stand. I inhaled, held it for a second, and then spoke, not just to the court, but to every child who's ever been erased in their own home. I told them everything. About being pushed aside. About working through tears. About hearing my mother praise Samantha while ignoring me. And finally, about the crash of silver and the blood that finally made them look. I didn't cry. Not because I was fearless, but because somewhere along the way I'd run out of tears. I'd spent too many nights grieving parents who never loved me the way I deserved. Now there was only resolve. Their attorney made one last desperate attempt to justify what happened. He said my father lost control in a moment of heightened emotion, that he wasn't himself. But the jury watched the footage. They saw the calculated fury, the raised arm, the unflinching strike. That wasn't emotion. That was entitlement. That was a well-practiced pattern of silencing dissent. After 3 intense days of witness statements, cross-examinations, and painful memories, the jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in less than 2 hours. All 9 jurors stood, their expressions calm but unwavering. The judge, a dignified woman in her 60s named Honorable Frances McAdams, looked down from the bench and asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a silver-haired man with a navy tie, nodded once. "We have, Your Honor." In the matter of Erin Wells versus Greg and Denise Wells, on the charges of aggravated assault, emotional abuse, and attempted unlawful coercion of property, how do you find the defendants? Guilty. On all counts. The words dropped into the silence like thunder. I felt my chest tighten and then slowly finally release, like air filling lungs that had been starved for years. Ethan beside me squeezed my hand. His eyes were glassy, but he smiled with pride. Judge McAdams wasted no time. Her voice was strong, deliberate. Given the weight of the evidence, the brazenness of the act, and the clear history of abuse, I hereby sentence Greg and Denise Wells to 8 years in a Minnesota State Correctional Facility, with no possibility of parole for the first 6. Gasps murmured through the courtroom. But she wasn't finished. In addition, she continued, the defendants are ordered to pay $325,000 in restitution for medical expenses, legal costs, and emotional damages to the plaintiff, Ms. Erin Wells. I sat motionless as court officers approached my parents and placed them in handcuffs. My mother turned once. Not an apology, but with a look of blame sharp enough to wound. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply didn't care anymore. Outside, a light mist had begun to fall. Ethan opened a dark umbrella and held it over us as we stepped down the courthouse stairs. For the first time in my life, I felt like the weight wasn't mine to carry anymore. I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was Erin Wells, a woman who stood in the storm and never backed down. We reached the bottom step. I paused, breath catching in my throat. Ethan turned to me. His eyes were soft, different than before. Not full of fear or sorrow but belief. "This life won't be perfect," he said quietly, "but it will be ours." Then without a word more he dropped to one knee, opened a small velvet box, and asked me to begin again with love and without apology. "Will you build a life with me?" Ethan asked, his voice low but steady. "One with no pretending, no pain, just peace, and the kind of love that never asks you to shrink." I didn't speak, couldn't at first. The tears came before the words. My lips trembled and I nodded, laughing through the flood of emotion. "Yes," I whispered, breathless. "I will." The ring he slipped onto my finger wasn't flashy. Just a simple silver band, smooth and quiet, just like us. No spectacle, no strings, no need to impress. It fit my hand and my heart like it had always belonged there. We didn't want a showy celebration. No chandeliers, no speeches, no guest list stretching a mile long. We planned a small ceremony at the end of May, right in the backyard of the house I fought to protect. The daisies had bloomed by then, lining the walkway with soft white petals. We borrowed 30 white wooden chairs from a friend. The sun filtered through the oak trees as guests arrived. Only the people who had stood beside me when it mattered. Marcus, my attorney-turned-friend, officiated the wedding. It felt right. He knew my story better than almost anyone. Daniel and his wife were there. So were Ethan's parents. A few co-workers from the lab I'd spent years working in came too. There were no camera crews, no choreographed dances. Just two people reading vows we wrote ourselves. "I won't promise we'll always have answers," Ethan said, voice trembling. "But I will promise this, you'll never have to carry the weight alone again." I didn't say a word. I just placed my palm over his heart. He understood. After the ceremony, we sat beneath twinkling string lights, plates of homemade food in our laps. Our wedding cake was baked by a neighbor, and the music came from my old Bluetooth speaker tucked near the porch steps. We laughed. We toasted. But no one posted anything, because no one needed to perform. That night, Ethan lifted me into his arms and carried me through our front door. Not because I asked, but because he wanted me to know I'd never walk into that house feeling unloved. A few months later, we painted the bedroom a warm cream. We planted lavender along the fence line. And together, we built a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf in the living room. It held every novel I'd carried with me through college, each one marked with notes from nights I couldn't sleep. Ethan called it the survival shelf. Sometimes I still wake with my mother's voice echoing in my head. But then I turn over, see Ethan pouring coffee, and I remember, I am no longer the girl they erased. I am Erin Wells, and I am finally living on my terms. Before I continue, if this story resonates with you even a little, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more ahead, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Let's keep going. And like Ethan once told me on a rainy night in our kitchen, we don't need perfect. We just need real. We just need us. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat on the wooden bench at the edge of our backyard, nestled between the rows of lavender and white daisies we planted together that spring. Golden light sifted through the maple trees, casting soft shadows across the stone path. On my lap rested a cracked leather notebook, one I had carried since high school. I flipped it open and found the first page. Faded but legible. One day I'll get out of this house. And when I do, I'll never beg to be seen again. I had written it when I was 16. And now here I was 34, married, safe, seen. I had made it out. I had made something of myself. I used to stand behind the door, clutching straight A report cards, waiting for anyone to notice. I used to skip dinner so Samantha could have seconds, while my mother called me the reliable one like it was a consolation prize. For years I believed love was earned, that I had to shrink, serve, endure just to be worthy of it. But I was wrong. The lawsuit was never about revenge. It was about reckoning. It was about standing up to the silence that nearly buried me. It was the final act in a life I refused to live in shadows anymore. I won't pretend I never longed for their approval. Part of me did. But now? I no longer need it. I have Ethan who loves me not for what I do but for who I am. I have colleagues who value my work, not my history. And most importantly, I have me, a version of myself that's whole, unfiltered, and free. Forgiveness came eventually. Not for them but for me. So I could breathe again. So I could stop carrying grief that was never mine to hold. After the trial, I began receiving messages from women all over the country, strangers who read about the case and saw themselves in it. One had been forced into marriage to save her family's business. Another had spent decades being told she was less than, because she didn't follow the path her parents carved. They told me my story gave them permission to say no, to walk away, to begin again. I cried reading each letter, because for the first time I understood that my scars weren't just mine, they were part of a larger survival map. That winter, Marcus, Ethan, and I co-founded a nonprofit called Hearthline, a resource center for people emotionally and financially abused by their families. We offer legal aid, counseling, and most importantly, validation. One afternoon, a woman in her 50s took my hand and said, "I didn't think I was allowed to leave. But your story gave me the courage to try." I hugged her tight. Because I had been her. Afraid. Voiceless. Waiting. But I found my voice. And now? I help others find theirs. But I made a choice to speak. And when I did, something unexpected happened. I didn't just make it through the dark. I lit my own way out. Erin Wells used to be a name whispered with pity, with condescension. A girl who was too quiet, too serious, or not quite enough. But now? It's a name that carries weight, not because I sought revenge, but because I refused to stay invisible. It took me 34 years to become who I truly am. The rest of my life will be lived on my terms, with peace, with purpose, and with a love that doesn't demand sacrifice. And if you, the one reading this, are still in that dark place, please hear me. You do not need anyone's permission to protect yourself. You are not selfish for choosing peace over chaos, clarity over guilt, freedom over duty. You are not alone. You deserve a new beginning. My story isn't just one of pain or betrayal, it's about the power of truth, and the strength it takes to reclaim your identity. From a forgotten daughter in Minneapolis, I rose. I stood tall, sought justice, and built something far greater than revenge. I built a life. And I live it now not to gain approval, but to honor the quiet fire that kept me going when no one else did. Have you walked a path like mine? Share your truth below, and don't forget to follow this channel for more stories of strength, healing, and the family we choose.